Our guest this morning, Archbishop Hosam Naoum, is known to many of you as he was the longtime Dean of St. George's in Jerusalem before being elected Bishop Coadjutor and consecrated in 2020. He became the Archbishop of a diocese that encompasses 5 countries and territories in 2021. For people at St. Albans, that includes Jordan, where you find St. Saviour's School, which, as you know, we have supported and continue to support as a key ministry of our global missions. I've asked the Archbishop to fill out his own story, but you probably know that he was born in Haifa, grew up in the Galilee, and is married to Rafa, and they have 3 children. But he'll tell us more about that. Mindful of the 122nd Psalm, in which we are asked to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, and may they prosper who love you and be secure. Let us pray. O God, from whom all holy desires, all good counsels, and all just works do proceed, give unto thy servants that peace which the world cannot give, that our hearts may be set to obey thy commandments, and also that by thee, we, being defended from the fear of all enemies, may pass our time in rest and quietness through the merits of Jesus Christ, our Saviour. Amen. Archbishop, welcome. Thank you for being with us in the midst of, it's an extraordinarily generous gift, and over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Geoffrey. And I would like also to take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you today present on this Zoom call. And I see familiar faces on the screen and names. So thank you very much again to each of you for sparing the time and to learn more about the Diocese of Jerusalem and the ministry of the Church here in the land of the Holy One. My name is Hosam, as Geoffrey mentioned, and I'm the Diocesan Bishop of the Diocese of Jerusalem. What I will be sharing with you today basically will be a bit about my own journey of faith, and then I will touch on the ministry of the Diocese of Jerusalem and St. George's Cathedral, and the work and ministry that we engage in locally. I will touch on our relationship with the worldwide church throughout the world, and mainly the Anglican Communion and other partners. And I will leave like quality time, good time for questions and answers, because I'm sure that you would like also to hear my perspective on issues that of concern to you, of course, and you would want to learn more about here in the Holy Land. So we'll leave that kind of also like quality time, as I said, for you just to kind of pick my brain and try to take advantage of my presence here with you. But again, I'm indebted to St. Albans and the Diocese of DC, across the river, Maryland and Virginia, a place that I call home, because I'm sure that many of you know that I had 2 degrees from Virginia Theological Seminary, and I lived in the DC area for almost 2 years, so kind of familiar to the geography of that place in specific, in addition to many other visits to different dioceses and states within the Episcopal Church and partners. You know, my journey began as a young person who was born into an Anglican Episcopal family, and all my life I've been involved in the church, and I always wanted to become a minister or to be involved in church ministry since my adolescence, and because that's felt like home for me, and I felt God calling me since I was a young person. And therefore, like people who ask me if I had a Damascus Road experience, I tell them not much, because it felt like a journey that still unfolds even now. Like me becoming now the bishop of the diocese means that I still kind of on the path of discovery and journey by understanding to what God really is calling me in the here and now, and that is the beauty of our calling, each in our own capacity, whether as clergy or laity, or in whichever way God calls us to be, even in society. So when I graduated from high school, I kind of immediately applied for selection, even before going to do any undergrad degrees. Although I registered to go and do a degree in the University of Haifa, but my bishop then, after being accepted by Synod and going through selection, I almost immediately went to seminary in South Africa. So I did my first seminary and first degree in theology in Grahamstown in South Africa. And at the age of 19, I was there. So it was very, very young. And people still see me as young, you know, I mean, a young bishop, like baby bishop, they call me now. But I would say I had really great experience in South Africa. I'm sure that you can imagine what does that mean for a Palestinian person who comes from Israel, going to South Africa for theological training and experiencing all the different issues that were happening within South Africa at the time. And I was there during a really interesting time, because I was there at the end of '93, and I was there during the first election of the first democratic election in South Africa in '94. But that was my time in South Africa, which was really interesting. And after graduating from the College of Transfiguration in Grahamstown, I came and I became responsible for, well, it took a while, but until my ordination, all of that, but immediately I came as a lay minister, then a deacon, then a priest in 2 congregations in the West Bank, in Nablus, which is Old Shechem, in Samaria, and also in Jenin, in Zababdi, and both called St. Matthew's Anglican Church, Episcopal Church in Zababdi, and St. Philip's Episcopal Church in Nablus, which is Old Shechem. You know, my journey there was also another chapter that I can maybe spend not only this morning, but I can spend weeks talking about my experience there as a young deacon and priest, discovering another part of life here in the area which is different to mine. As Geoffrey mentioned, I come from Galilee, from the northern part of Israel, and I didn't have. We would hear on the news as much as you would hear on the news, especially as a young person, what was happening and taking place in the West Bank. Although it's only maybe an hour drive, but if you don't have any personal involvement there, you wouldn't go to the West Bank unless you want to visit. Or so I didn't have much of an experience before going there as a deacon. It was towards the almost, I would say, the beginning of the Oslo Agreement. So there was a relative peace at the time when I went to Nablus and Zababdi. It was after the Oslo Accords, and the situation there was, I would say, relatively peaceful. I would just simply, when on my day off, go back home to Galilee, 1 o'clock in the midnight, 2 o'clock, I would just drive up, and had, I would say, 4 years of relative peace, tranquility, no incidents whatsoever. But then in 2000, things changed for the whole area, and specifically for Nablus. As you know, Nablus is called by many Palestinians and others as the mountain of fire, because like Nablus is one of the most, maybe I'm using the terms correctly, but it can be one of the most violent places in the West Bank when problems happen, especially confrontation with the IDF, with the Israeli forces, and with settlers. You know, things can become really, really devastating if violence erupts in that place. So in 2000, you know, with the second Intifada in September that year, things deteriorated in a significant way. And I will tell you, like, for 2 years, 2001 and 2002, The times I left Nablus, I would say maybe they were handful. Not more than 5 times that I left the city of Nablus. One of those times were me getting married and Rafa getting married in 2002. Why is that? Because the whole city was under curfew, strict curfew, like people couldn't leave even their homes during these 2 years. So they would open every 10 days or 2 weeks. I remember, like having a tank just parked outside the church compound, staying there for weeks, an Israeli tank and the army and all of that. So again, that was another experience that I myself as a priest there, trying to minister to the people in the midst of conflict and very tempting and difficult security situation. Again, as an Israeli citizen myself, have Israeli papers. If I was caught by the army, they would ask me like, what the heck I am doing there? This was the very common question. What are you doing there? Like, what are you crazy? Because like they wouldn't imagine like somebody who is an Israeli citizen living there. So I would explain to them what I am doing there and my involvement in the church and the hospital. And then like towards 2005, I moved to Jerusalem with my family. Then my son was only 40 days old, like 40 days, like only over a month when we moved to the cathedral. And I began my ministry here in Jerusalem as the pastor for the Arabic-speaking congregation, which is the local Palestinian community in Jerusalem, in East Jerusalem. And then since that time, I'm here. So I've been here in Jerusalem almost 18 years now. It seems like a long time, but it also feels like yesterday when we came here. And my son will be graduating from high school this year in less than a month's time. So that means that like we have been living here, my family, especially the children, all they know is Jerusalem. That's their experience, their schooling and all of that. During my time in Jerusalem, as I mentioned, I came for a sabbatical year, about a year and a half, which I spent at the Virginia Theological Seminary, where I did my master's degree with the concentration on canon law and also the studies of biblical Hebrew, among other things. Excuse me. And after graduating, I came back to Jerusalem, and then I was made the dean. Just excuse me 1 second. And after I graduated, I came back to Jerusalem and became the dean, and I was appointed as the first indigenous dean since the establishment of the cathedral. We used to have English deans before, and I stayed as dean for until my election, as Geoffrey mentioned. And then after a few years of becoming the dean, I felt also a need for further education, especially in the area of congregational study and the ministry and leadership. And I was quite involved in the ministry of ecumenism and interfaith. These two areas that were really kind of a passion within my ministry, especially in a place like Jerusalem, trying to kind of lead the communities into understanding each other, especially like, our own challenges as Christians together, but also the challenges that goes wide and deep within the community, where we have the 3 Abrahamic faiths, Jews, Christians, and Muslims living side by side, with all the hopes and challenges and the opportunities and the shortcomings of trying to figure out what it means that we belong or live in Jerusalem. So these were kind of my heart, and I did my Doctor of Ministry program also at Virginia Theological Seminary for about 4 years. I've been coming back and forth every year and doing this degree, which I eventually graduated and defended my thesis that led me towards the end into something a little bit different from interfaith and ecumenism, actually into the area of women empowerment and leadership within the Palestinian church here in Jerusalem. So kind of that was quite a shift, but at least I continued working on issues of leadership and governance and charity boards and vestries. So there was a lot of kind of congregational diocesan work, as I'm sure that some of you maybe know what the men program means in that sense. So that was kind of terms of education, and then later after finishing that degree, and Bishop Suhail was retiring at that time. We had the elections, and then I started asking myself again the same old question of, yes, Lord, what do you prepared for me for the next phase? What is it that you want me to do? And after prayer and consultation and reflection, even again at the young age, I was made the young canon at the cathedral and a young dean, and I said, like, is it really time for me to run for the office of the bishop? And then the Lord kind of guided the church into this, and again at a young age became the Archbishop of the Diocese of Jerusalem, with I would say with great responsibility, because as you can imagine, having 3 countries which are, I would say, one of the most complicated areas in the world, whether we talk about Syria, whether we talk about Lebanon, whether we talk about Israel, Palestine, maybe not so much Jordan, but in terms of the political struggle, but enough having 4 countries within the diocese that are struggling politically and financially and on many other levels. And also to know that the Anglican Church, and I will touch on this when I introduce the diocese, being small in number, but have, I would say, very extensive institutional ministry and community building programs, puts us in a place, like with a lot, I would say, high expectations, because the Diocese of Jerusalem has a lot to contribute. And I have to say that the Anglican Church is really on the map here in the Middle East, as well as within the Anglican Communion, with an important presence and voice of moderation and bridge building and reconciliation that continues to be a very important voice in a world that is surrounded by extremism and fanaticism, and trying to combat all of that together. The Anglican Church finds itself in the heart of all of that, basically. So I really kind of take this opportunity to thank many of our friends who've been praying for the Diocese of Jerusalem, for its ministry and witness, and for me personally, in order to continue to lead and to shepherd this diocese that is dear to many, many people around the world, especially Episcopalians and Anglicans around the world. And this is maybe kind of a quick overview of my journey and the things that are on my heart as a clergy, as a man of faith, as a Christian. And I really pray that God will continue to bless my ministry so that I can continue to be to reflect the image of Christ and to be hope for many people here who are hopeless in this area. Going to the second section of my reflection, I would like to kind of go now briefly touching on the ministry of the Diocese of Jerusalem and the kind of work and ministry that we engage in as a diocese. First and foremost, just kind of, again, I will just repeat what Geoffrey said about the geography. The Diocese of Jerusalem extends into 5 countries, including Israel, Palestine, Jordan, Syria, and Lebanon. So these 5 countries that compose quite a bit of the Middle East, but we belong to a larger province, as you can imagine, like pretty much as the Episcopal Church has provinces, but it also has many dioceses. We had 4 dioceses, but now we're down to 3. The 4 were Egypt, North Africa, and the Horn of Africa, which became now an independent province called the province of Alexandria. And now we are left with 3 dioceses. This is only like 2 years ago. We're talking about recent history. We left with 3 dioceses: Jerusalem, us, with the 5 countries that I mentioned. We have Cyprus and the Gulf. So all the Arab Peninsula, including Qatar, including Kuwait, Arab Emirates, Yemen, Bahrain, and many other countries within the peninsula, including Saudi Arabia, and Cyprus as the center. And then we have also the Diocese of Iran. So this is the province. That's what makes the province of, it's called the Episcopal Church in Jerusalem and the Middle East. That is the province's name. We are called the diocese, the Episcopal Diocese of Jerusalem, not of Jerusalem and the Middle East. So that when people use that kind of term, that can be confusing, because we are the Episcopal Diocese of Jerusalem, period. I was recently also elected to be the primate of the province, which I will consume the office next year in the spring, which means that I will be also the primate of the whole province, including Iran, Cyprus and the Gulf, and the Diocese of Jerusalem as the Archbishop and primate of the province. Basically, the Diocese of Jerusalem, I can explain the ministry in quick 4 points, and I always refer them as these 4 ministries are the pastoral care, what we call them the pastoral care, and this we will talk about pastoral care just like any other diocese, our parishes and the congregations, the ministry within these places. They continue to be a beacon of hope to many people that we serve. And maybe one thing that I would like to add to maybe exactly or similar to your congregations and dioceses, like having Bible studies and youth and women gathering or mother union and other places, services and all of that. But one thing that I think that is quite unique in Anglican congregations or where Anglican parishes are, that the priests, our clergy, when they are in a place, they become the priests and pastors of the whole town and village, not only to Anglicans per se. This means that the coordination and the work that the clergy do in their congregations is quite wonderful because they engage with the whole community and not only care for Anglicans themselves only. So that's really a wonderful gift that the Anglican clergy engage in as pastors of the whole city or the whole village. And the second arm of ministry is that of the institutions. Now, when we talk about institutions, maybe people will be surprised to know that we have more institutions than congregations. We have over 30 institutions, about 33 institutions. And we have only 27 congregations within the diocese. This means that you can see that the focus of the Diocese of Jerusalem, for the most part, I would say that in addition to carrying the message of Christ in evangelism and mission, we have quite a unique involvement in the wider community by showing our faith in action through these institutions. So when we talk about institutions, one thing that drive the diocese to kind of think about these institutions, coming from the ethos of Jesus's own ministry and mission as teacher and as healer. So we know, Jesus's ministry maybe can be summarized with these 2 components, in addition to his salvific work, of course. But these 2 components, that him being a teacher and also being a healer by concentrating and looking at his healing miracles that he performed as when he was here with us on earth. So basically, deriving from that, the Diocese of Jerusalem, like many churches around the world, of course, became interested with the Ministry of the Schools and Education and colleges and universities, as well as hospitals and clinics, rehabilitation centers, and other social programs. And this was our, and still is, I would say, the driving force of our Christian ethos in a multi-ethnic, multi-religious setting, where we have Jews and Muslims and Druze and many other sects that live there, but they see in these institutions as refuge and as place for education and healing in a very unique way. And this is an absolutely wonderful gift to the community in which we serve. And I have to say here as well, you know, we have Heidi with us on the call, and I'm sure that, you know, both St. Albans and the American Friends of the Diocese of Jerusalem, you know, especially now, I'm sure that Geoffrey mentioned a specific project of Zarqa, our Savior School in Zarqa, and I was there recently. And we did the graduation 2 days ago in Zarqa, which was a beautiful graduation for our graduates. And this was my 8th graduation that I do, and I have still 7 to go. But you can imagine, you know, like, you know, now is a time of harvest, you know, educational harvest, going at each and every school and doing the graduation ceremonies as the chair of each board of these schools. And it is a blessing. It's a wonderful blessing. And I have to say, it is humbling to see what our schools are doing in these places. I can give you also like just a quick story about something that I experienced myself when I did the graduation in Salt. One of the graduates there, and our institution there is called the Holy Land Institute for the Deaf and the Deaf Blind. And there were about 25 graduates from different sections of the school. But one of the graduates from the high school was a deaf blind young man. And he was the first graduate, the first deaf blind graduate in the entire Middle East ever to graduate with this certificate. And immediately thinking about that, immediately I and the director talked about to offer him a job at the institution on the same day. So we graduated him and then announced his employment on the same day, because he has nowhere to go as a deaf blind person who he needs special care. As you know, but he has gifts that he can share, and the institution will continue to embrace him. So this is maybe one story, and of many stories that happen within our institutions, showing Christ's love through action and ministry gives life to the people of the community. And I would like to take this opportunity to thank, you know, Geoffrey and Jim and many others at St. Albans, our friends, who are supporting our work, and the many blessings of the American Friends of the Diocese of Jerusalem that keep our institutions open and vivid and lively, with so much hope giving to the people here of the Middle East, and especially in the Diocese of Jerusalem. And then the third arm of ministry is that of peace and reconciliation, and I touched on that when I talked about the importance of ecumenical work within the diocese and the Christian relationship, the interdenominational relationship with other Christian denominations. And we have in the area here 3 main families. There could be 4 if we want to divide the Orthodox, but these 4 families consist of the Orthodox, Eastern Orthodox families, like the Greek Orthodox Church, and the Oriental Orthodox family, like the Armenians and the Copts and the Ethiopians. And we have the Catholic family that includes Roman Catholics, Greek Catholics, and also the Protestant churches or evangelical churches, like the Episcopalians and the Lutherans, and other small representation of other denominations. there is so much need, and today we see that how the churches came together, united, well, certainly not theologically yet, although we hope that we can be more and more theological discussions, and there is on a kind of a global level, and I hope that that permeates into more and more dioceses and more closely theologically speaking. But in terms of when it comes to the common concern and issues that concern the Christian presence of the Christians in the Middle East, the churches have to come together, united in order to preserve the Christian presence, preserve our heritage. And I have to tell you that, what is happening here and how churches feel, especially in the place where we consider Jerusalem to be the cradle of our faith. This is where everything began as Christian. This is exactly where Jesus was born and lived and died and rose again. So we know that there's a huge responsibility on the Christians of the Holy Land to keep the Christian presence alive and also even thrive, if you wish. So that's an important thing that we engage with, like on daily basis. We work hand in hand with other churches in order to preserve the Christian presence and, as I said, protect it and make it thrive, and being able to offer more and more hope to our people and the people who come to visit with us. And then we have the interfaith dialogue with Muslims and Jews, and of course I would say there are a lot of wonderful stories happening, but one thing that hinders the work of interfaith is the political situation in the Holy Land. And I would say, there is so much desire among Muslims and Jews and Christians to engage in such dialogues, but unfortunately, the political situation prevents quite sometimes, especially if there is something going on, like we have watched recently about the Jerusalem Day. We see other, like during Ramadan, during the festivals, whether Jewish festivals, Christian festivals, when things happen in Jerusalem, clashes and conflict do occur sometimes, and unfortunately this hinders that kind of dialogue that we hope and we desire that people continue to have these dialogues, because that's the only way forward for building peace, for promoting reconciliation between the different peoples of the Holy Land. And finally, I would just like to touch on the fourth arm of ministry, and that of pilgrimage, and the people who from around the world who come to visit with us, people who come and live here in Jerusalem. I saw Tom Gitman, whom I worked together in Jerusalem in my early days in Jerusalem, and many others who have visited Jerusalem. But I would say that pilgrims who come to the Holy Land make a huge difference in people's lives, and specifically Christians who are here. Why? Because we feel that we are not left alone when people come from overseas to worship with us, to come and see what we are doing, to support our ministry. Excuse me. And therefore, pilgrims who come here, they build our congregations. And I can speak about Jerusalem, like the cathedral here. Normally, we have an average of 20 or 30 members of the local congregation. But I will tell you, our congregation every Sunday, and we thank God now we are back almost to normal with our pilgrims. So we have full cathedral since March, that we have over 150 to 200 congregation members on a Sunday morning. And that's really a blessing for us to kind of have that kind of presence, whether local or expat or pilgrimages. And I have to say that also pilgrims bring with them a lot of experience that's good for their formation, but also they reassure us with their presence and their support that we are not left alone. And therefore, one thing I tell pilgrims, that what we do here in the Holy Land in terms of ministry, whether the institutions or whether the congregations, we do it on behalf of the whole Christian church, not only on behalf of the Diocese of Jerusalem. We are here to be your voice, to reflect your presence, and also to offer a home for you when you come here. And that's the blessing of the ministry of the Diocese of Jerusalem and many other churches here in the land of the Holy One. And I will stop here, maybe, and then we can give some time, Geoffrey, if you'd like to kind of share that, or Jim, and see how our discussion goes. I can touch on many other issues if we don't have many questions. I can go and cover areas that I haven't in my introduction. But thank you very much again for your time and for allowing me to share with you some of the thoughts and the hopes and aspirations and challenges that we face here in the Holy Land. God bless you.
Thank you so much. There are a number of questions, so I'm going to turn this over to Jim, and we'll take time to address them.
Thank you, Geoffrey, very much. Thank you all for being here, and thank you especially to the bishop. The questions are still coming in. Bishop Hosam, a couple of them are about your situation personally. There's some questions about the interfaith dialogue, and so at this point, it seems easiest to start from the beginning of the questions, and there are two or three or more questions coming in, Bishop, about how you might consider the current situation between Palestine and Israel relative to the history that you lived in 1993, that being the situation in South and Southern Africa.
Thank you, Jim. Yes, I thought when I first was planning to go to South Africa, I said, well, this is my chance to solve the Arab-Israeli conflict when I go to South Africa. But maybe they have tools there that they might help me. And actually, like I would say that, even with a bit of, I don't know, like if it is regret or whatever it is, but I was disappointed, to tell you the honest truth, because all the tools that I learned there, of course, they helped me personally. They helped me on a personal level to understand, and as a Christian, to tackle issues from a Christian perspective. And it is important for us, even though people may disagree that it was a conflict among Christians, whether we like it or not, the Dutch Reformed Church or whoever was in power there, at least they used a Christian narrative in order to kind of impose apartheid and trying to understand the gospel from the eyes of the white against the black and all of that. But then again, of course, going there and living there among the people whom I was so blessed. And again, this is where the part, on a personal level, I grew up in absolutely ways I didn't even imagine, to become a person who loves and appreciates reconciliation, being with late Archbishop Desmond Tutu, whom I knew very, very well. We became very good friends, and he used to call me the kid from Nazareth, whose dad is a carpenter, and he said, I will stop there. By the way, my dad is a carpenter, or was, so we together have gone together on many activities, services, and he was the chair of the board where I was. So I learned a lot from him. I learned a lot from the people there, both white, sorry for the classification, but the people of Africa, the rainbow of Africa. That was absolutely a gift to my own formation and my ministry. But again, when I tried to kind of to kind of get the threads that kind of lead me to the conflict in Israel and Palestine, it became a difficult one. Now, maybe people can talk about similar situations within South Africa, Israel, Palestine, and Northern Ireland, because these are the three places that people normally draw the kind of the similarities together in order to say, oh, it's the same thing that's happening there, happening here, happening there. But I don't know how much is that true. One thing that brings these three places together, which I think it's not helpful for politicians or those who are looking for politics, that it is a human sin that results in these things to happen. Now the thing that who is the kind of the perpetrator and who is the victim becomes the story of our lives, trying to kind of analyze who is that on this side or that side, who is the victim and who is the perpetrator. When we talk about South Africa, I remember when people began to talk about the Commission for Truth and Reconciliation. I'm sure that you've come across this, and the notion in order to bring reconciliation between the different divides within South Africa resulted in people opening up a huge and very sensitive, very real, very difficult stories. And kind of no one had the capacity to deal with them properly, because open a subject and then how do you deal with it? How do you deal with people who had emotions, had history? So it became a very difficult one. But I myself, let me say that one thing that we could agree that between the two situations that I at least lived and observed, that there is discrimination, there was discrimination in South Africa against Africans and people of color. And I said the thing that was, Christians were discriminating against other Christians, for that matter. But here in Israel, we have in Israel, Palestine, we have people who are discriminating against others, and we know that Israel being the one who has the power, discriminating against Arabs and Palestinians in the area here, and people kind of wanting to classify such discrimination to be an apartheid and make it equal to what was happening in South Africa. I myself, I don't want to come to a judgment whether it is apartheid here in Israel, Palestine or not. But one thing that I can definitely tell you that the Palestinian people definitely live under very difficult circumstances. They experience a lot of discrimination in terms of the equal opportunities that they have. But I would say I myself will be not hesitant, because I want to use that word, but I would say that what is happening in terms of state discrimination is something of something that leaves us all to reflect on as human beings. And for the people of Palestine, one thing that their desire is that to have a free state alongside Israel, living securely side by side. Two-state solution continues to be the stand of the church. But I believe that there are so many people, Jewish people, who realize this, and I think, and for the sake, and I say it here, I say it, and now this is recorded, and I always try to kind of be a voice of moderation and reconciliation, because we know that there are so many Jewish people who are working for the peace, and they have a wonderful sense of reconciliation. Those who are our partners, as much as Muslims, who also have the same view. Our problem, when it comes to these difficult issues, becomes with the extremists. And I wanted to talk about here specifically those who've been following. We were recently, since Christmas, we've been talking about extremist Jewish settlers in Jerusalem specifically. And we made it very clear, it doesn't represent the state of Israel. It's a fringe of group that are really making our life as Christians difficult one in the city of Jerusalem. We spoke about this vocally and explicitly, and I think we don't want to kind of classify the whole situation to be as such. It's important for us, to talk about specific issues that, hinders our ministry as Christians, talking about the Christian side of things at least. But, to go back to the main question, yes, there are similarities in terms of the same sinfulness of human sin, discriminating against or not having equal opportunities that exists not only Israel, Palestine, and South Africa, and Northern Ireland at least used to exist, but in many, many places around the world that, like people kind of looking at themselves to be superior to others, or looking at people that they are inferior to others. I think this is the kind of human sin that we try as Christians to refute and to work so that we bring people together. We don't want to exclude anyone from this, and I'll say, like, our narrative is not to exclude the Muslims or Jews. It's on the contrary. We know the character of Jerusalem, and I have to say it's as complicated as South Africa, but definitely it is a different context. We have to realize that it's a different context, that we cannot just simply use the situation there and apply it in there. And lastly, I would say my last observation on this is that, like, one thing that, in South Africa worked, and which is the point I began to speak about, is that the narrative there that people used in South Africa was pretty much Christian. Like, and when we speak about Christian language and narrative, everybody across the board would understand that. So we use words like Exodus, you use the cross, you use about bondage and freedom and all of that. People understand this language because they are Christian and they know their Bibles. But in this situation here, when you talk to Muslims, Christians, and Jews, a language that is exclusively Christian, not many people are gonna identify with what you are talking about. And that is, for me, was the kind of the disappointment that I kind of felt that, okay, so I have all these wonderful tools about my Christian faith, but I don't know how to utilize them in order to bring people of other faiths to understand my point of view. This was, the biggest challenge. So this is, in brief, a very complicated question, indeed, but at least an observation, about the main feelings that comes to me, somebody who studied in South Africa, and trying to apply what I learned there in terms of contextual theology, in terms of indigenous theology, and all of that, which continues definitely to help me personally, and also in the wider context here in the Holy Land.
Thank you, Hosam, very much, especially for the last part about the difficulty of it and the cognitive dissonance when you're telling a Christian narrative to someone who doesn't share that same story. Very, very insightful. Hosam, there are two questions regarding one of the four components of the work of the Diocese of Jerusalem, and both of those questions are related to interfaith dialogue. One question asks, in a general sense, what kind of work you're doing in interfaith dialogue, and the questioner is interested in how members of congregations participate in those conversations. And the second question is related specifically to dialogue with Jews.
There are two levels. Let me begin with something. So let's talk about the church's ministry for the last 100 years or so. To begin with the beginning of the 20th century, before the establishment of the State of Israel, there've been the people who lived here, they lived together, both Muslims, Christians, and Jews. And I remember St. George's School next door to where my office is, which is called the Bishop's School. We used to have Jewish, Christian, Muslim, Armenian, many different nationalities who were studying at the school. So there was a kind of more, I would say, conviviality existing within the different, on the wide spectrum of Jerusalem and even the region. And that was also similar to the Middle East at large, like in Egypt, in Yemen, in Syria, in Iraq, you would find a lot of Jewish, Arab, Christian, Muslim relations. They were not always at their best, but at least there was a kind of a coexistence. There was tolerance that people would live together. Now, after the First World War, after the Great War, things began to change. Why? And I will give you one thing that summarizes everything, I would think, but it needs, of course, unfolding. You know, like it began with the drawing of the current borders and the creation of the different countries like Kuwait, or countries like Iraq, Lebanon, or countries like Palestine, or countries like, you name it, Tunisia. You know, these are new countries that were created after the Great War, and which divided people in a sense, and also gathered people according to nationality, according to religion, according to specifications. And among those, of course, you know, like creations were also the intention to create State of Israel, which was created after the Second World War. And then, you know, things became more complicated to the area in a sense that, you know, the creation of the State of Israel became a controversy among the Arab world, which created the tensions. Therefore, segregations happened. So therefore, what happens at that time, at that year, the schools that used to have mixed students of different religions, that stopped from happening. So the Jewish schools became like kind of segregated schools, Arab schools became segregated schools, and all our schools that existed for 170 years here in Jerusalem and the Holy Land became exclusively Arab, both Muslims and Christians. Now, the Muslim-Christian relations always viewed closer together because of these political realities, because the Arab sector was kept together, and with the Muslim-Christian relations continued to be relatively in many places, of course, positive, and people talk about the one living and conviviality between Muslims and Christians, and as Palestinians or as Jordanians or as Lebanese, but not so much within the Jewish Arab relations. Again, because of the political situation, which meant that there is a great need for Christian or Palestinian, Israeli or Jewish relations, and specifically Christian-Jewish relations. Now, Christian-Muslim relations didn't need much attention because of the situation that I explained, but certainly Jewish-Christian relations needed to be taken care of because of that divide that happened. You know, we know here in the Middle East, and it is something very important for people in America to hear this, that Christian, Jewish, Muslim relations is not something new that we are trying to discover. You know, we lived here for centuries, you know, like, you know, at least 14 centuries as three religions and 2,000 years as Christians and Jews, okay? So it's important that, you know, we need to kind of think that there's a long history of these relations that were like kind of dodgy in some places, but it is long, and we have a huge cumulative memory of these relationships, okay? So that's something important we need to understand. And at this point in time, because of the specific situation, political situation, we are engaging in these kind of questions. How can we bridge the gap that was created because of the political situation? Now, what people, again, if you remember, I mentioned something that hinders the dialogue between specifically Christian and Jewish or Palestinian Jewish, whether Muslim or Christian, is the political situation that people are fearful of normalizing with Israel, or Jewish being seen as traitors or betrayals of their own Jewishness, talking to Arabs or trying to compromise. So each community pressures its people in order not to engage with other people who are different from us because of the political situation. But unfortunately speaking, what people don't understand and realize that there is, at the end of the day, whether we like it or not, although people will tell you no and all of that, but at least there is a huge difference between being Jewish as a religion and being an Israeli. You know, I'm an Israeli citizen, doesn't mean that I'm Jewish, if you know what I mean. But you know, like, nothing should stop us as Christians talking to our Jewish sisters and brothers. You know, in a dialogue, you know, we should be in conversation. And as I always say, you know, Christians in the Middle East, they are bridge builders in what sense? Although some people don't like using that word, as if we are not part of the situation. But at the end of the day, Christians have a unique position because we are culturally speaking, we are Muslim because we have the language, the Arabic language, and we have the values of the society, conservative and all of that, tradition, the cuisine, the food, and many other things. But also, we are pretty much also religiously speaking connected to the Jewish faith, you know, because 2/3 of our Bible we share with the Jewish community. That is our existence. So we have that unique position as Christians in order to be bridge builders and voice of moderation and reconciliation, so that we can bring people together. And that's how it should be, you know, like the Abrahamic faith existing here, you know, it's a wonderful opportunity that we continue to live together. And many of us, this is how we grew up. And again, not everyone agrees with that, that we all belong to the same God. You know, and that's, again, I know that can be a big statement, but here in the Middle East, we use the word, even Christians, by the way, before even Muslims use the word Allah, we use the word Allah because that's the Arabic word for God. And it is very similar to the Hebrew, by the way. If you say Elohim, it's the same root, it's the same word, like you use the same vocabulary. So, but at the same time, you know, like having a shared kind of Abrahamic faith, being Abraham, our common ground, humanity as common ground. We have people who engage within our congregations, grassroots, and we have also clergy who are involved in dialogues, but also we have bishops and clergy who are involved in international dialogue, like the Anglican Jewish International Commission, for example, that is on the Anglican Communion, which is kind of headed by the Archbishop of Canterbury and the team at Anglican Communion Office with the Jewish Anglican Dialogue. So we are involved on different levels, but I have to say it is shy at the moment. It's not the way it should be, especially with our Jewish sisters and brothers. So that's kind of basically touching on that important subject that is really dear to my heart, that I would love to see happening in different ways in order to bridge the gap and to kind of minimize the divides.
Thank you very much, Hosam. I think I have next for you what is a three-part question, and it has to do with whether you might be able to comment, and this may fall under your work in the area of pastoral care. What is life like for the average Christian in the Holy Land right now would be piece number one. Piece number two, Hosam, has something that you mentioned, the problem of extremism. And one of the conversations that's happening within the Episcopal Church in the United States right now has to do with a couple of kinds of extremism. One of them is on the Israeli side. Another dimension may be on another side, but there's also a conversation about Christian extremists and Christian Zionists. So part number one, a comment on what things are like for the average Christian in the Holy Land today, if you could comment on both sides of the conversation about extremism, and then a third piece would be, can you talk to us about what's happening with youth and young people in the many facets of the work of pastoral care, peace, reconciliation, interfaith dialogue, and pilgrimage in the Episcopal Diocese of Jerusalem?
Thank you, Jim. Let me begin with an average life for a Christian person in Jerusalem and the Holy Land. I would say, like, we are looking at people who, what runs in their mind, basically one big question. What does the future hold for me and my family? In a place where there is so much ambiguity, there is so much, and not so much actually opportunity for Christians, being small number or small percentage of the population. We are almost less than 2% of the whole population of the Holy Land. Talking about 170, 180,000 between Israel and Palestine altogether. So the whole of the Holy Land is quite, worrying for us, because this means that our challenge is existential. Why? Because we face that exodus of Christians from the Holy Land, which kind of endangers our Christian presence, especially our young people who tend to leave the country. Why young people? Because the young people are ambitious. They want to kind of have a future, a life, and establish families and career and all of that. And they look around them and they don't see a sign of hope for them, or at least a sign of implementing their ambitions as young people. So what happens that, people who are capable, people who are able, people who are educated, these are the ones who tend to leave. So we are left with, I don't want to say, but generally speaking, we are left with people who have less, I would say, and less to offer to the community, in a sense, and which is really devastating. And therefore, I would say the average person would be just looking at how they can get their daily bread for the family. That's how it came down to this, unfortunately. But in the midst of this, there's one thing that I would like to tell you about Christians in the Middle East, and specifically here in the Holy Land. That these people are resilient. They have that sense of resilience that is so strong that despite everything, they continue to smile, and they continue to laugh, and they continue to have hope. And all of this is coming from one thing, one important anchor in their lives, and that is the empty tomb, the Holy Sepulchre. That just knowing that Christ has victory in his resurrection and the tomb is empty gives us all hope. And that is the image that we all cling to, that at the end of the day, life has the final word, not death, not alienation. That's basically the first part of the question in its kind of challenges and hopes. The second part of the question about extremism, and you are absolutely right, Father Jim, because extremism doesn't have to do with any religion. It's the other way around. It's human beings who twist and manipulate religion in order to justify absolutely human sinfulness and greed. Those who are the ones who try to kind of do that. And we find this across the board. We shouldn't, accuse that, Judaism or Islam or, we have the tendency as human beings to point our fingers on the others and say, those are extremists. Those are this. So what we will result with, people who are anti-Semitic. We will result with people who are Islamophobic. And we will result with the Christians who would want to revive the Crusader times. You know, in a sense that, Christians are better than others. And all these kind of illusions that people have in their minds that create that sense of greed and exclusion. And they think that, their narrative is the narrative to be accepted, and everybody else is, or that is not worth of existence or anything like that. So basically, talk about extremism. We have extremism across the board. We shouldn't say that, there's one religion is fertile for extremism more than the other. Depending where we are, we have experienced all sorts of extremism and fanaticism. And I have to say that, like Zionist Christians or Christians who have Zionist views, in a sense, are seen by many Palestinians as people who do not understand what it means for the Christian presence in the Middle East, what their beliefs are, because they take that narrative. And I think, and if you remember, I mentioned that we as Christians share 2/3 of the Bible with Jewish people, but they don't see the other side of the Christian life here in the Holy Land. They don't realize that, that we are connected to a larger community that we live in. And, the story that connects Christian person with the Israeli narrative, I don't want to say Jewish because it's not much about Judaism as much as about the Israel's policy within the Holy Land, that they don't see the whole story, and they think what they think in terms of their perspective is that for their own interest only, not the interest of people who are living there. They don't realize that, their narrative, what it means to the people on the ground that are witnessing in Bethlehem and in Jordan or in Beirut or even here in Nazareth. That's important. So and I will tell you something. I don't want to be judgmental myself. I don't want to end up being extremist myself. But what I am saying is that people don't have a sense, when we talk about this extremism, they don't have a sense of, first of all, conversation. They don't have a sense of what community is about. And all what they think about is exclusion and segregation and trying to kind of sell one story, and that is their own interest. Now, I will tell you kind of something, and you know this, that extremism is the easiest thing in life. To be an extremist is the easiest because you have nothing to defend, you have nothing to compromise, and you have no one to talk to. Because what you believe in, that's it. But in order to be kind of a voice of reconciliation, as we see it, it's a ministry that we are called. We are called to the ministry of reconciliation. Jesus Christ was the example of that reconciliation. And we are called to talk to people. We are to care for creation. Extremists, I believe, in one way or the other, don't see that. Again, I might be judgmental, might be prejudiced, but that's the way I see extremism to be lost opportunities to live as a community, as different, as diverse as we can be. And the last one, our youth, as I said, having all of that kind of on their mind, make them worry about so much in life as they build their future. We as a church, and many churches around the world, we know that the young people are the most difficult, our stakeholders within our congregations. Why? Because it's like in order to kind of bring the youth and make the church relative to them is not something easy, or at least deliverable. Something that we can deliver as a church. Although we can continue, there are more congregations and parishes successful than others. But across the board, generally speaking, we have that challenge, as well as here in Jerusalem. We have that challenge because a lot of our young people are not even within our congregations because they are abroad, or they are studying overseas, or they are working overseas. So we have lost a big of our youth to the kind of the international community. But at the same time, we are working very, very hard in order to engage the youth in the ministry of the church. And I will tell you something that, we recently, only yesterday, we were talking about women's involvement and women's ministry within the church. And I think for the first time, our synod, our convention, our diocesan convention, will actually be 50% men and women. This hasn't been the case in the past. 50 years ago, it was all men. Like, imagine, tell me something, how things are changing to the better. And yesterday, we also talked about representation of young people within convention. And now I'm putting to the floor, this is maybe something that I shouldn't be saying on the screen because it hasn't come to synod, but I will be proposing, and something really to be happy about, proposing to synod to have a quota for the young people, like at least 2 voting seats in convention, in order to have the voice of young people in synod. So that's kind of a bit here about young people who are the present and the future of the church, to which we have to give a lot of attention if we are very serious about church traditioning and faith traditioning and the passing on of the faith.
Fantastic. Hosam, we've got 15 minutes maximum left. I think I've got 2 more questions for you, depending on what comes in to the chat. First question goes back to your personal story. And it's a question that came early in the conversation about how and if your family was able to remain in the territory of Mandate Palestine and Haifa during the Nakba.
Yes, my family has lost a lot of its members during the Nakba. So many of our relatives left Haifa. I myself come from, well, at that time it was a village, although it was kind of a town, but a very small town in just outside Haifa. We are only like less than 4 kilometers from Haifa. It's very, very close. I was born in Haifa, in a hospital in Haifa, but originally I'm from Shafa'amir. And actually in Shafa'amir, which is quite kind of surprising, people don't hear that much. That's one of the very, very few cities or towns in Israel, or before 48 in Palestine, that actually had Jewish leave the city into other places. So we used to have in Shafa'amir Jewish community before 48, Jewish, Muslims, Christians, and Druze. But then in 48, the Jews left the country and went to a neighboring town and other places. So that's one example of what's happening. But many of my family relatives in Haifa, in other places, left to Beirut at that time, to Lebanon. And from Lebanon, they were dispersed to other places around the world, like the States and Canada, Europe, like England and Australia and other places. My family stayed there because my family, come from a working class, and they had land and assets, so they didn't leave. It was more difficult for people who lived in big cities to stay, and of course the narratives were different. But they had houses mainly, but they didn't have much property and land at that time. But my family, coming from a smaller village, they had property and assets, so they didn't leave the town itself. So we stayed there, and my parents, as kids at that time, both my parents were born 2 years before 48. So they were born in 46. So they were born just 2 years. They were 2 years when all kind of changed for them. But my grandparents, stayed there, been living there for many, many years. Originally, we came from Syria. Like 400 years, we came down from Syria into what was called in Palestine, into the Galilee area. So that's kind of the history. So you will find people who left and fled, and others who stayed. And those who stayed now became 25% of Israel's population. So we have 75% of Israel are Jewish, and 25% are non-Jewish, like mainly Arab community within Israel, who are Israeli citizens as well.
Fantastic. Geoffrey, I'm going to ask Hosam another two-part question and then hand it back over to you. First half, Hosam might be a little bit difficult, and the second one hopefully is easier as we close. First part of the question is, do you think that the Anglican Church, the Episcopal Diocese of Jerusalem, has a prophetic role to play, especially in regard to some of the actions of the state of Israel, in particular actions that are detrimental to the health and wealth and well-being of Palestinians in the Holy Land. And the final piece, and thank you so very much for your hour and a half today, is we've got about 70 people on the Zoom call this afternoon. Thank you all for participating in this first of a three-part discussion on life in the Holy Land. How is it that we can continue to build our relationship with you and with the diocese and with the Holy Land?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much, Jim. First of all, let me begin by responding that if I feel, especially as the bishop or as a priest in the past, when I was the dean or when I was a pastor, if I feel that the church does not have a prophetic voice, I will not be sitting in this office. Now, to begin with this statement, okay? It is quite, sometimes it's so easy for people to talk the talk, but not walk the walk. It's so easy to kind of accuse the church of not being prophetic, and we should be more critical of the state of Israel and all of that. But people who live here, and they know, and I wasn't shy to say that there is discrimination, and you heard me saying that on the screen. I didn't say that life is a honeymoon here in the Holy Land. We know that each and every one of us, we know what is going on in this land, and we know how to address them. We know the language that we use. Maybe if as an individual, I will be saying different words to that when I am a priest within a diocese, or I'm a bishop representing the head of a church and the official stand. But we all know, and I have been explaining this whether in small circles or wide circles, we know what is best for our communities and how to address different issues and how to be prophetic. Doesn't mean that if I raise my voices, or if we raise our voices, or if we are kind of making a huge controversy or big wave, that we are prophetic. I think as Walter Brueggemann says in his book Prophetic Imagination, being prophetic is being imaginative, being knowing exactly the narrative and the language that we use. If I know that using the word apartheid can benefit the Palestinian people or the church, or it can bring more Jewish people on our side to combat discrimination that is happening, I might say, okay, I will use that word. I'm not here to judge using or not using, but I know that my voice as a church that brings life to the community that I am serving and beyond, I know that I need to be careful, not only for the sake of keeping my own peace. I have nothing to fear. I'm Hosam, I'm talking about myself. I have nothing to hide or fear. I have one thing, that to be faithful to my people, to offer my people life, not to make things difficult for them, but at the same time to be a voice of truth, as I say it, without excluding or keeping people away, or trying to kind of push people away. We have so many partners who are Jewish and who are willing to help. Imagine that I would also want to use such words that I kind of be indiscriminately trying to use narrative that can harm our relationship with so many people who are helping us already. And in addition to all of that, maybe that's only, but we can talk about this for a long time. But I would want to tell people who talk from afar, to say, like, people are not living here to know what are the kinds of pressure that people live under. And to make statements, like whether the church is prophetic or not prophetic, I really kind of plead to you that to leave this for us and our people, to decide what is prophetic and what is not prophetic. And because it's such a difficult issue, it's not the black and, sorry, I shouldn't use that word, but it's not like one way or the other. It's not one way or the other. We have to be wise, we have to be humble, and at the same time continue to strive for peace and dignity for every human person. That is our baptismal covenant. And what is it that we will gain if we don't do that as Christians? So therefore, I would say that, yes, I am prophetic, and my clergy are prophetic, our people are prophetic. And I believe that, depending on the situation, we will use different language to describe different situations. And it doesn't have to be one cliche. That's my understanding. And what we do behind the scenes is far greater than putting it on a Facebook post or writing an article or anything like that. We have big responsibility to care for all our people, not only one group and not the other. So that's the first one. And but still, I'm not saying that out of pride or out of humility. And I continue to say that I'm still learning. I'm still on a learning journey, and we continue to be open in order to see what the Spirit is leading us to do and to be in these difficult situations. And the final question was about relationship and how can the church worldwide, and especially like the Episcopal Church in the United States, can help us. It's quite important, I think, for you to know that what you are doing already is really great and wonderful. We are indebted to our friends throughout the world, and specifically to the church in the US. The Episcopal Church has been great supporter to the Diocese of Jerusalem for a long time. Even before my time, before I was born even, the church has been supportive of the Diocese of Jerusalem, and it continues to do that. We know that, on one level, praying for each other, and Geoffrey kind of summarized that in a very beautiful way. When we pray for the peace of Jerusalem, when you pray for us, when you pray for all people, not only Christians, you see, and again, sometimes even our prayer we choose, people can even divide the people of the Holy Land even by their prayer. But we are praying for all people. We are praying for the common good of everyone. Yes, we have our friends, Christian people, and whom we pray for, our partners in mission, that's important. But I think praying for us is very important. And it really gives us sustenance, spiritual sustenance, in order to carry on with our mission, the mission of the Lord that is entrusted to us in the place where it all happened. And the second important thing is that, again, I want to commend the work of the American Friends of the Diocese of Jerusalem. And, they are friends indeed, because the work that they are doing is really beyond imagination. People who are really connecting day and night together in order to provide for the institutions and to provide for the ministry of the Diocese of Jerusalem. I would like really to thank everyone involved in that, all our friends, those who are working with American Friends, those parishes and congregations, individuals, foundations, and it has been great help because that really provides, yes, material need, but I'm sure that you understand how much this support means for our people, and changing the life through education and healing of the community is really the gospel. That's the good news that we provide to the people. And also the Good Friday offering, which you all know. Now we are this year celebrating 100 years of the Good Friday offering. So it's our first centennial, to which we give thanks to God for all the people who are involved in that as well, especially 815, the Episcopal Church and the offices of the Episcopal Church in New York and the whole of the Episcopal Church. And also lastly, again, to tell you that how much we are thankful for all those who come and see, those who come and visit with us, our dear pilgrims. I know some people can like to say they use the word tourists or visitors or whatever word you want to use, but at the end of the day, we see you as pilgrims. We see you as people who have come here on a journey of faith to be with us and to share our worship, to share our life. And it makes a huge difference in your life and in our life. And I hope that this will be an opportunity that you come and see for yourself the different issues that we talked about today. I might tell you something, another Jewish person may tell you something, another Muslim person will tell you something. But coming to see it for yourself, I think that would be the most authentic thing that you would see. So please, we will urge you to come and see and be with us. Come and see the beauty of this place. Despite all the things we talked about, people who come here, I will tell, trust me on this, but they would always want to come back. They would always want to come and see Jerusalem again because it's such a beautiful place. So thank you, Jim. Thank you very much, everyone else, Geoffrey, for this opportunity, and may God bless you all. And I hope that we will welcome you in person here in Jerusalem and in the land that is beloved and dear to all of us.
Thank you, Hosam. And in the words of the three great faiths that you have mentioned, Shalom, Salam, peace to you, and Geoffrey, over to you to close the session for today.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us this morning, and a special thanks to you, Bishop. We are so grateful for your kind words. In a few minutes, I'll ask you to close with by granting us a blessing. This is the first in a series. Next week, we have two people, one Jewish, one Muslim, in conversation with each other. And Professor Mohammed Dajani Daoudi is actually an example of someone who underwent the pressure that the Archbishop talked about, in that he had lost his job at Al-Quds University when he took a group of Palestinian students to Auschwitz. It'll be an engaging and I think deep conversation. And then the third week is Stephanie Saldana, who was with us for much of this session. And both the next 2 weeks have suggested readings that you received and videos when you received your registrations. And I hope many of you, all of you, will be able to join us for those occasions. I'd like to acknowledge in Thanksgiving the presence of our own Bishop, Bishop Marianne Buddy. Thank you so much for joining us, Bishop, as well. So with that, Archbishop, if you'd be willing to offer a prayer and blessing, we will come to a close.
Thank you, Geoffrey, and I'd like also to thank, I didn't realize that Bishop Marianne is here with us, so also blessing to Bishop Marianne, whom I know in person, and a wonderful supporter also and the partner of our ministry here in Jerusalem. The Lord be with you.
So with you.
And the peace of God, which passes all understanding, keep your hearts and minds in the knowledge and love of God and of His Son, Jesus Christ. And the blessing of God Almighty, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit be with us all forevermore. Amen. Salam to everyone, and may God bless you all.
Thank you. Peace and blessings.
Peace, my friend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.